When my wife passed away, about 4 years ago, we took her back to Pennsylvania for her services, and I found this book in my parents' library. This book I had never seen before, and it had an unusual binding on it in that library. And I opened it at random, and I thought I'd share with you what I read to the very place I opened it back then, because the words were quite remarkable, and I've never read anything like it. This is called A Child of Nature, and it's written by Hamilton Wright Mabie, who was a religious essayist back in the 1800s. And I'm just going to begin now, and I think it needs no introduction. It will become self-obvious. This is chapter 7. John Foster had made 2 great discoveries without taking note of his journey or waking out of the dream of childhood. And now his dream began to center about the bare little schoolhouse, and new figures moved in it. There, as at home, John was silent. He did not hold himself apart, and there was no touch of pride in his detachment. But language failed him. He knew not how to speak of the things in his heart, and other things barely touched him. He had his place in the games, but he seemed to be taking a part rather than playing. The shouts, the rush, the turmoil, the stir and tumult of recess and holidays never penetrated the quiet places where he lived. The textbooks were faithfully studied, but they left him cold. Their speech was not his, nor did the things they taught mean anything to him. It seemed to be the way of the world to know these things, and so he learned them, but they neither liberated nor inspired him. Various masters, competent and incompetent, sat behind the little table with its row of dull books, but the real teacher never came that way, and the boy's spirit remained untouched. There were a few books in the little library of the school, mostly of the kind that are born dead. But there were also a few that lived, and it chanced that one of these books came into the boy's hand, and thence into his pocket, and was carried afield the next day. He knew nothing of its origin or of the man whose heart was in it, of the spiritual conditions which helped to fashion and were reflected in it. It was to him simply paper with black marks upon it, stretched out at the foot of a great tree, with the murmurous music of the forest gently touched by the wind above him. He opened the book indifferently and without expectation, when suddenly, like a flash, a phrase seemed to leap out of the book into his imagination. It was a line from Burns, one of those fine simplicities of speech in which a deep thought lies like a star in a mountain pool. In that moment, the boy knew without knowing what art is and means. He caught a glimpse of that perfection in which spirit and form dwell together in immortal harmony, truth and beauty bearing a new flower on the ancient stem of time. There was magic in the line. The earth suddenly shone with new meanings. The boy's heart danced with inward glee. It seemed as if he must break free from the bonds of time and place into some unrealized liberty, some boundless freedom, wide enough for his soul to run at large in. The glow of that hour lasted long, and as fast as it began to fade, was renewed by the touch of another poet. For the boy had found his way to the singers, and the world was flooded with music. He walked on air in the ecstasy of those first days of fellowship with the seers the thinkers, and the poets. The fields about him seemed to spread to the horizon as he ran, and they were swept by gusts of fragrance from the immortal fields where the vanished singers chant beyond the touch of care and time. The woods were haunted with half-seen forms, which the world had long ago banished and forgotten, won back to their ancient haunts by the boy's faith and vision. And the stars, as he walked the lonely road at night, were like swinging lamps set along some great celestial highway where the immortals pass in majestic procession. The touch of the imagination lay on the whole earth, like a light which brings all hidden, obscure, and mysterious things to view. The boy was walking by the light which has shone on the path of every poet since time began. The power to create was not to be his, but he lived in the creative mood. The wonders were all revealed to him. The joy was in his heart, the rapture in his eyes. For a new heaven and new earth were born in his imagination, and the morning stars sang again the great song of beginnings. And that's the end of chapter 7.